Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
The train rattled through the night, its rhythmic hum a comforting backdrop as I sat beside Zara, my 10-year-old daughter. We were returning from a long day visiting my mother, who had fallen ill, and the exhaustion weighed on us both. The train was mostly empty, save for a few late-night travelers lost in their own worlds. Zara leaned her head on my shoulder, her eyes heavy with sleep. I stroked her hair absent-mindedly, my thoughts wandering, when a sudden commotion near the entrance of our carriage caught my attention. An elderly man, struggling with a large weathered suitcase, was trying to maneuver it down the narrow aisle. His hands shook with effort, and his breath came in short, labored puffs. I watched as he tried to lift the suitcase onto the overhead rack, his frail arms barely managing the weight. Before I could move to help, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Can't you hurry up? Some of us have places to be." A well-dressed man in a tailored suit was glaring at the elderly veteran, his face twisted in impatience. He looked every bit the part of someone who expected the world to move at his command. The old man, clearly embarrassed, muttered an apology and tried again, but his strength failed him. The suitcase slipped from his grasp, thudding to the floor. Zara sat up, her sleepy eyes now wide with concern. Without thinking, I stood up. "Here, let me help you," I said, stepping forward. Ignoring the annoyed huff from the wealthy passenger, I hoisted the suitcase onto the rack with a firm push. The elderly man looked at me with gratitude in his tired eyes. "Thank you, young lady. I'm not as strong as I used to be." The man in the suit snorted. "You shouldn't be traveling with something you can't handle." "Excuse me," I said, my voice cold as I turned to the man. "That's no way to speak to anyone, especially someone who's clearly struggling." He rolled his eyes, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. "Just sit down and mind your own business." "Respect doesn't cost anything," I replied, meeting his gaze with a steady glare. A murmur of agreement rippled through the carriage. I noticed a few other passengers nodding in approval, their eyes on the old man, who had taken a seat near the window, his hands still trembling slightly. I turned back to Zara. "Why don't we give him our seats?" I suggested quietly. Zara nodded eagerly. "He looks tired, Mom." We approached the veteran, who looked up as we stood before him. "Would you like to sit here?" I offered. "It's more comfortable." His eyes softened. "That's very kind of you, but I don't want to put you out." "No trouble at all," I insisted. "Please, take our seats." After a moment's hesitation, he accepted. Zara and I helped him move to our seats, where he settled in with a sigh of relief. The other passengers seemed to rally around him, offering smiles and small gestures of support, a stark contrast to the rude passenger, who now sat quietly, his earlier bravado faded. As the train continued its journey through the night, Zara and I found ourselves standing in the vestibule between cars. The air was cool, and the steady clatter of the train's wheels was strangely soothing. I looked down at Zara, who seemed unusually thoughtful. "That was really nice of you, Mom," she said, her voice soft. I smiled, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "It's important to stand up for others, especially when they can't do it themselves." Zara nodded, her eyes reflecting a new understanding. "I'm glad we did that." As the train carried us onward, I felt a sense of warmth and pride, knowing that a simple act of kindness had brought us closer together and had made a difference, however small, in someone else's life. The cool air in the vestibule between train cars was a welcome relief from the stuffy carriage. Zara and I leaned against the wall, the sounds of the train's wheels a steady rhythm beneath us. The night outside was dark, the occasional flicker of lights from passing towns the only break in the blackness. We had left the elderly man in our seats, and I could see from the distance that he was now resting peacefully, his eyes closed as if the weight of the world had been lifted off his shoulders. "Mom." Zara's voice broke the silence. "Who do you think that man is?" I looked down at her, seeing the curiosity in her eyes. "I don't know, sweetheart, but he's clearly been through a lot." Just then, the door to the carriage opened, and the elderly man himself stepped into the vestibule, his hands braced against the walls for support. I moved quickly to help him, guiding him to a seat by the window. "Are you feeling all right?" I asked, concerned. He nodded, though I could see the fatigue etched into his features. "I just needed a bit of fresh air," he said, his voice gravelly but warm. "Thank you again for your kindness back there. It's rare these days." Zara looked up at him, her youthful curiosity shining through. "Were you in the army?" The old man smiled, a faint, nostalgic light coming into his eyes. "Yes, I was. A long time ago." "What was it like?" she asked, her innocence piercing through the heavy atmosphere. He hesitated, as if weighing how much to share. "It was difficult," he finally said. "But it taught me a lot about life, about people, and about what really matters." Zara leaned in closer, captivated by his words. "Did you have any friends there?" His smile faltered slightly, replaced by a look of deep sadness. "Yes, I had one friend, Umar. He was like a brother to me." I felt a jolt at the name, but I didn't say anything, letting him continue. "We fought together in World War II, then in Korea," he continued. "Umar saved my life more times than I can count, but he didn't make it out of Korea." Zara's eyes widened. "I'm so sorry." He nodded, a small sad smile on his lips. "It's all right, dear. I've made peace with it. But not a day goes by that I don't think of him." His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of memories. I felt a deep pang in my heart, thinking of my own father, who had fought in the same wars. Could this Umar be the same man my father had spoken of so fondly? Before I could ask, the train jolted and the old man steadied himself against the window. "It's been a long journey," he said, almost to himself. "But I'm glad I got to meet you two tonight. It's good to see kindness still exists in this world." Zara smiled at him, her eyes full of warmth. "We're glad we met you too." As the train sped through the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was more than just a coincidence. There was a connection here, something deep and meaningful, just waiting to be uncovered. The early morning light filtered through the train's windows, casting a soft glow over the carriage. Zara had fallen asleep against my shoulder, her breathing slow and steady. The elderly man sat across from us, his eyes lost in thought as he stared out the window. The world outside was waking up, but inside, the weight of the conversation we'd had in the vestibule lingered. I carefully shifted Zara's weight so she could lie down more comfortably, then looked over at the man. "I couldn't help but notice you mentioned a friend named Umar. My father also fought in World War II and Korea. His name was Umar." The old man's gaze snapped to mine, his eyes widening with recognition. "Umar," he whispered, as if the name itself held power. "Could it be? What was your father's full name?" "Umar Khan," I replied, my heart pounding. A flood of emotions washed over the man's face, shock, joy, sorrow. "Umar Khan," he repeated, his voice trembling. "He saved my life in Korea. But he never spoke of a family. I didn't know he had a daughter." Tears welled up in my eyes as the realization hit me. "You're Magnus," I said, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "My father told me about you, about how you were like brothers. He always said you were the bravest man he knew." Magnus's eyes glistened with tears. "Your father was the brave one. He gave his life so that others could live. I owe him everything." We sat in silence for a moment, the enormity of our connection settling in. It felt as if the years had melted away, and the bond between Magnus and my father had brought us together across time and space. Magnus reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn, leather-bound photo album. "I carry this with me everywhere," he said, handing it to me. "It has all the memories of our time together. Your father is in many of them." I opened the album with trembling hands. The first photo was of two young soldiers, their faces dirty but smiling, arms slung around each other's shoulders. My father and Magnus. Page after page, the photos told the story of their friendship, their hardships, and their shared courage. Zora stirred, waking up as I reached the last page. "What's that, Mom?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "It's a photo album," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "Of your grandfather and his best friend, Magnus." Magnus smiled at Zara, his eyes softening. "Your grandfather was a hero, just like you are to your mother." Zara looked at the photos, her young mind trying to grasp the significance of it all. "He looks like you, Mom," she said, pointing to a picture of my father. I nodded, wiping away a tear. "He was a good man, Zara. And Magnus here was his best friend." The train began to slow as we approached our destination. The world outside was fully awake now, the sun climbing higher in the sky. But inside it felt like time had stood still, allowing us to connect with the past in a way I never thought possible. As we gathered our things, Magnus spoke again, his voice soft but determined. Your father's sacrifice wasn't in vain. He saved lives, including mine, and because of him I've lived a long life filled with many blessings. Meeting you and Zara is one of those blessings. I hugged him, feeling the warmth of his embrace. Thank you, Magnus, for everything. He patted my back gently. No, thank you. For bringing back the memory of a dear friend, and for showing me that kindness still exists in this world. The train finally pulled into the station, the screech of the brakes jolting us back to the present. As passengers began to gather their belongings and make their way to the exit, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment, as if I had reconnected with a part of my father I thought I had lost forever. Magnus stood up slowly, his body showing the signs of a long life lived fully, but with its fair share of wear and tear. I could see the fatigue in his eyes, but there was also a spark, a renewed energy that had been absent before. Where are you heading, Magnus? I asked, not wanting this moment to end. He smiled, a twinkle in his eye. I was planning to visit an old army buddy, but I think I've found something much more important today. I furrowed my brow, unsure of what he meant. I've been alone for a long time, Magnus explained, but meeting you and Zara has reminded me of the family I lost, the one I never got to have. I don't have anyone left in my life, but you're the daughter of my best friend. And if you'd allow it, I'd like to spend more time with you, to get to know you both better. My heart swelled with emotion. Here was a man who had shared so much with my father, who had been through the toughest of times, and who now sought a connection with the family of the friend he had lost. It was a gift, a chance to keep my father's memory alive in a way I had never imagined. We'd love that, I said, my voice choked with tears. You're part of our family now, Magnus. We'll make sure you're never alone again. Zara beamed up at Magnus, her youthful joy infectious. Can you come stay with us, Magnus? We have a guest room, and Mom makes the best pancakes. Magnus chuckled, the sound rich with happiness. That sounds like an offer I can't refuse. We stepped off the train together, the station bustling with life. People hurried past, each absorbed in their own world. But for the three of us, time seemed to slow down. We walked side by side, Zara's small hand slipping into Magnus's, a bond forming between them as natural as breathing. As we left the station, the sunlight bathed us in warmth, and I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The past had found its way into the present, bringing with it a future filled with hope and love. Magnus had found a new family, and Zara had gained a grandfather she had never known she was missing. The days that followed were a whirlwind of joy and discovery. Magnus moved into our guest room, and it didn't take long for him to become an integral part of our lives. Zara adored him, and he seemed to grow younger with each passing day, his spirit lifted by the love and warmth that now surrounded him. Every morning we shared breakfast together, the kitchen filled with laughter and stories. Magnus would regale Zara with tales of his and my father's adventures, his voice animated as he described their escapades. Zara would listen with wide eyes, her imagination running wild as she pictured her grandfather as a young soldier. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Magnus cleared his throat, drawing our attention. I've been thinking a lot about the future, he began, his tone serious but gentle. I don't have much time left, and I want to make sure I leave something behind for both of you. I reached out and placed my hand over his, squeezing it reassuringly. You've already given us so much, Magnus. You don't need to worry about anything. But he shook his head, a determined look in his eyes. Your father saved my life, and I've been blessed to live this long because of him. I want to pass on what I have to you and Zara. It's not just about money or possessions. It's about ensuring that his legacy lives on through you. Tears welled up in my eyes as I listened to his words. I had always felt a deep connection to my father, but Magnus had brought that connection to life in a way I never thought possible. He had given me a piece of my father back, and now he wanted to ensure that Zara and I would be taken care of, just as my father had taken care of him all those years ago. Over the next few weeks, Magnus put his affairs in order, making sure that everything was in place for Zara and me. He even set up a trust fund for Zara's education, ensuring that she would have the opportunities he had never been able to give his own children. As the days passed, Magnus's health began to decline, but he faced it with a grace and strength that was inspiring. We spent as much time together as possible, cherishing every moment. One evening, as the sun set, casting a golden light across the room, Magnus took my hand in his grip weak but full of love. "Promise me you'll always remember the importance of kindness," he whispered. "It's what brought us together, and it's what will carry you through life." "I promise," I said, my voice breaking as tears streamed down my face. With a final, peaceful smile, Magnus closed his eyes, slipping away quietly in his sleep. He left us the same way he had lived, with dignity, love, and an unshakable faith in the goodness of people. Zara and I were heartbroken, but we found comfort in knowing that Magnus had lived a full life, and that we had been able to give him the family he had always longed for in his final days. In the weeks that followed, we held a small, intimate funeral for Magnus, honoring his life and the legacy he had left behind. Friends and neighbors who had come to know and love him gathered to pay their respects, sharing stories of his kindness and generosity. As we stood by his grave, Zara slipped her hand into mine, looking up at me with tear-filled eyes. "I'm going to miss him, Mom." "I will too, sweetheart," I replied, my voice choked with emotion. "But he'll always be with us in our hearts." We planted a tree in Magnus's memory in the garden he had come to love so much. As the seasons passed, it grew tall and strong, a living reminder of the man who had touched our lives so deeply. Years later, as Zara graduated from college, she stood beneath that tree, her diploma in hand, and whispered a quiet thank you to Magnus. His legacy had given her the future she had dreamed of, and his spirit continued to guide us both. In the end, it wasn't the wealth or the possessions that mattered, but the love, kindness, and memories we shared. Magnus had shown us that even in the darkest of times, the light of human connection could bring hope and joy. And as we moved forward, we carried that light with us, always remembering the man who had taught us the true meaning of family.